Americans and Hispanics comprise of 58% of all prisoners since 2008 up to this particular date and it makes up approximately 1/4 of the U.S. population. Now there are some things or some entities that kind of help to this. When we talk about today's drug sentencing disparities, we got about 14 million whites and 2.6 million African Americans reportedly using illicit drugs. That's 5 times as many whites are using as many drugs. 5 times as many whites using drugs as African Americans. Yet African Americans are sent to prison for drug offenses 10 times the rate of white people. African Americans represent 12% of the total population of drug users, but 38% of those are arrested for drug offenses, and 59% of those in state prison for some type of drug offense. We can say some of the contributing factors are inner city crime. We can say it's prompted by economic or social isolation. We could talk about crime and drug arrest rates, where we find African Americans represent 12% of monthly drug users, but comprise of 32% of persons arrested for drug possession. Now, when they talk about a thing they did about maybe 8-9 years ago, they talked about tough on crime and war on drug policies, a mandatory minimum sentencing, especially in disparities in sentencing for crack and powder cocaine possession. Back as far as 2002, blacks constituted more than 80% of the people sentenced under that federal crack cocaine law and served substantially more time in prison for drug offenses than whites did, despite the fact that more than 2/3 of crack cocaine users in the United States were white or Hispanic. I have to ask the question, what is wrong with that picture? Well, I have to say this too, there is nothing new under the sun, because when you look at this particular passage of scripture in the book of Ezekiel, you'll find that God, by divine revelation, unveils to his street preacher the unenviable task of delivering a message to the exiled Jews in Babylon. This fearless street preacher comes to the Jewish nation bearing a long list of sins that were committed by them over the years. And it was a list that left no stone unturned. Exposure started with leadership and came all the way down to the very least of it. You notice in that 22nd chapter of Ezekiel, around verse 2, God refers to the city of Jerusalem as the bloody city, as it had become a city that was excelling in murder. Now, there were 3 areas that were dealt with when you look at that particular chapter. He dealt with the political, he dealt with the religious, and he dealt with the social. The government, the priests, the prophets, as well as the people were now at the point of God's judgment because of such sinful acts. And I do have to say this before I go out there. I got to put a minor disclaimer out. Some of this is going to be just a touch graphic, so I'm just going to say, just pray for me and ask God for my forgiveness. If I say something that might be slightly offensive, it's not meant to be offensive. We have to preach the truth around here and stop running away and acting like we're Catholics. Now, so at the point of God's judgment, because some such sinful acts, such as idolatry, oppression of widows and orphans, and forcing immigrants and visitors to pay for protection, or in other words, they were committing extortion. They were falsely accusing prisoners of crimes that they never committed and would sentence these prisoners to death, while they themselves, I need you to pay attention to this, this is what the government was doing, while they themselves committed adulterous acts, which included having sexual intercourse with ministrating women, according to Jewish law, was supposed to be abominable in and of itself, and that act was supposed to be punishable by stoning to death. And there were some women who were, and a lot of men who weren't. The priests and the prophets were guilty of such things as incest, racketeering, extortion, despising and ignoring the Sabbath, performing their lackadaisical, let me get this right, come on here. Despising and ignoring the Sabbath, performing their God-given duties in a haphazard manner, forgetting about God. And I like what verse 25 says. It says there's a conspiracy among her prophets. So let's deal with what's going on in the religious set. Therefore, like a roaring lion, raising prey, they have devoured souls. In other words, they stalk weak, feeble, helpless, easy, non-resistant people, and often would profit of pesticides, so they would turn around and get material gain or wealth and devour these people and literally ruin their lives to the place and point where they had nothing to look forward just so that they could turn around and get some type of financial gain by making known to these people what they would call the mind of God. They would often give a false sense of hope and assurance that these religious leaders, who were wolves literally in sheep's clothing, would also hire hitmen to kill many of the husbands so that they could extort the wives or the widows for sexual favors and turn around and get them to do other little crazy things. Now, in Ecclesiastes, I found that in chapter 1, verse 9, the preacher penned these words, which really reflected the conditions of their day and still reflects the conditions of our day. Well, if you get the chance to read it, you'll come to find out, he says in the NIV, what has been done will be done again. And what is will always be. There is nothing new under the sun. And the same things that took place in those days, Paul talks about perilous times in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. Today, we understand, we see men out there who are lovers of themselves. They're covetous, they're boasters, they're proud, they're blasphemers, they're disobedient, they're parents. They're unthankful, they're unholy, they're without natural affection. I have never seen a time in my life where people want to parade around their quote-unquote sexual gender. It's okay for you to tell me that you're a man in a woman's body or a woman in a man's body, but you have a problem with me getting on my knees and praying over my lunch. Or you got a problem with me going into the cafeteria and saying Jesus is Lord. Or you got a problem with me standing in a public place and saying hallelujah. I got an issue with that. And the sad thing about it is, Mr. or ma'am or sir, with all due respect, it ain't that you are a homosexual. It ain't that you are a lesbian. It ain't that you are a dyke. It ain't that you are transvestite. You are just simply confused. You have lost your way, and you have forgotten who was in control. I serve a God who does not make a mistake. I serve a God who knows what it means to be holy. I serve a God who put you here for a purpose, but somewhere down the line, you took a detour on a road that was supposed to be an entrance and not an exit, and you got a little messed up. You're running with the wrong line of traffic. So stop selling me this lie about you are a lesbian. Stop selling me this lie about you are homo. I don't want to hear it anymore. I'm not going to buy it. My God ain't buying it. If you ever decide to pick up your Bible, you find out that God finds it to be rather distasteful. If I get kicked out of the church, it's because I deserve it. Anyway, let's keep it moving. These people have a form of godliness that denies the power thereof, and from such, we have to turn away. What I'm trying to get you today is, my brothers, my sister, God is looking for a man or a woman who is willing to take a stand against sin and avert the coming judgment. Is there a man in the house that will serve as a watchman on the wall? Even as God spoke to Ezekiel in chapter 3, verse 17, when he told the prophet, Son of man, I made you a watchman for the people of Israel. So hear the word I speak and give them a warning from me. God instructs Jeremiah, as you already heard me read a little while ago. He said, Jeremiah, put your Nikes on. I need you to run up and down the street. I need you to go out there and find out if there's anybody that has any desire to stand up to be who I called you to be. Is there anybody out there who has a love for the things that I have laid down? Is there anybody who wants to feel my heart and convey my heart to his people? Is there anybody who's not afraid to say, for God I'll live and for God I'll die? Is there anybody out there who understands what it means to hold up the blood-stained banner? Is there anybody out there that wants to say, I want to know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his suffering? Is there anybody out there that wants to be made conformable unto my death? Take a trip out there, Jeremiah, and let me know. When Jeremiah comes back and says, oh Lord, are not thine eyes upon the truth? In other words, God, you see what I see, and you know some things that I have missed. And so God asks, is there a man in the house that seeks the wisdom of God? A man who's willing to step up to the plate and declare war on sin while going to bat for those who have been taken captive against their will? Is there a man in the house who has no desire to fit the mold that belongs to the world? Is there a man who has a delight in the law of the Lord? Is there a man in the house who refuses to walk in the counsel of the ungodly? Is there a man in the house who refuses to stand in the way of sinners? But you know what? It's not so much as what's on me. It's what's in me. That's what counts. I don't care if you're a chief bishop, super potentate, lead arch, I don't know what else to put in there. There's so many titles. You can have a PhD, you can have an LHD, a UAD, an NCC. But if you ain't got HG, haven't gone through the course of theology, if you haven't got HG,